Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Charter Skills Accelerator with Life Labs Learning. I'm Jay Loff. I'm one of the co-founders here at Charter, and on behalf of our partners at Life Labs Learning and Brand Live, I want to thank you all for spending this hour with us today. This series and program is one of the many ways in which Charter attempts to deliver on our mission, which is to help you transform your workplaces to be more fair and dynamic, places where all of your employees and thereby your companies can thrive. And so this is one of the ways in which we do that. Other ways that we do it are available to you, I think, in the link in the chat right now. If you have not already done so, I encourage you to subscribe to the Charter newsletter. It's free of charge. And hope that you'll investigate Charter Pro, which is a membership for senior HR leaders that provides you with additional resources, original research, and advisory, among other things. And I hope that, again, you'll click on the link there and investigate Charter Pro. For those of you who have not joined one of these sessions before or have missed prior sessions, you can also go back and watch any of the prior Skills Accelerator sessions online on demand. And there, again, should be a link in the chat right now to that. There's a homepage at which you can go back and revisit at your leisure any of the programs that involve topics like productivity, inclusive leadership, feedback culture, and more. So I hope that you'll have the chance to do that as well. This program in this series does not happen without the generosity of our two partners, and I want to take a minute to thank each of them. Life Labs Learning, as you may know, has programmed all of the Skills Accelerator sessions just expertly. They are master facilitators of these kinds of workshops and training sessions. They're designed to help you actually improve the skills of your workforce and your teams to just improve the performance of your company overall. And I hope that you'll investigate working with them more deeply than the little slice of mini workshop that you'll see from them today. They're a terrific partner, and we're grateful to them for that. The program also isn't free of charge without the generosity and actually the technology of Brand Live. Brand Live is the official live stream partner for all virtual programming that we do here at Charter. We're delighted to be working with them as well. And I want to give their CEO and founder, and CEO, Sam Colbert-Heil, just a minute to tell you a little bit more about Brand Live.
We're thrilled to sponsor this series with Life Labs Learning and Charter, and hope that it's a shining example of what's possible. Because let's face it, everyone is bored out of their minds with talking heads and little boxes. At Brand Live, we're injecting a little bit of soul into this thing we're calling hybrid work. Whether it's a webinar series like this one, your biggest marquee event of the year, a new hire onboarding series, or your next town hall. We're reinventing how companies and leaders communicate and teaching them to use video so that these moments look and feel like the television and TikToks we're watching outside of work each and every day. Because the key to making sure your audience doesn't tune out is to make it so good they'll tune in. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and thanks for joining us.
That's a wrap. Nice job, everyone.
Thank you, Sam. We agree with that sentiment, and that's why we work with you. We'll get started in one more second. I have just a couple of housekeeping items. One is use the chat to say hello to each other. It's also a resource for you. There should be links to various resources throughout the programming here. And it will also be a mechanism in which to interact with with today's moderator, Megan Wheeler. She'll prompt you to ask questions at the right moments, answer questions or polls when she's ready to interact with you all. And so use the chat for that. At the end of the session, we're also going to prompt you through the chat to just take a few seconds to fill out a survey that gives us feedback on the program. And we really encourage you to do that. It helps us continue to iterate on and improve this for your benefit as well as ours. So I hope you'll do that. Now, without further ado, let's get into the program. This is a collaboration lab. It is designed to help give you the skills to both recognize and navigate conflict in your organization, help you foster collaboration across teams that may have different cultures and norms and styles of working, and then pro tips to help you scale that across your entire company. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to the director or head of facilitation at Life Labs Learning, my good friend, Megan Wheeler. Megan?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Collab Lab. This is probably one of my favorite sessions to actually say out loud, is just naming it what it is, the Collab Lab. I am Megan Wheeler. I am our Director of Facilitation at Life Labs. My background is in industrial organizational psychology, and I'm really excited to explore this topic with you today. We're really going to be digging into conflict and collaboration skills that can make or break a company. So this is a skill set that I will say I have seen totally achievable with these really small changes that can have a really big impact with companies, and we can do it really fast. So let's take a look. If we start here with a pulse check, what percent of work at your company would you say requires collaboration? So I'm actually going to ask you to take a guess at the percentage of work at your company that requires collaboration. And I'd like for you to just put that percentage into the chat. I'll be looking at your answers to get a sense of, in the group today, the percentage of work at your company that requires collaboration. Put your guesses into chat. All right, and this is where I really truly wish I had like prizes to give out or candy to throw out. So Melissa, first answer I see come through, yes, 80%. 80%. That means thinking of all the emails that we're sending, the amount of time that we're on phone calls, the amount of time we're in meetings. This actually comes from a 2016 study where researchers found that roughly 80% of the work that we do, the tasks that we are asked to achieve, are required with working together. What I find fascinating about this is up. It's a 50% increase from 5 years earlier. And what I will say is, from working with clients now, I would say it's just as high or even higher today. So if we dig into this, we're looking at all of the different areas. I say this is good news. For some of us, it can feel like, I feel like I'm in meetings all of the time. I just want that opportunity to get my work done. But when we look at collaboration, when we work at work that is collaborative, this also demonstrates that there's a ton of positive impact from effective collaboration. So we can see higher productivity, we see lower burnout, we see higher engagement, we see profitability, creativity. We even see higher employee retention when collaboration is done well. So when it works, it feels really great. I think we've all been in those moments that have felt really synergistic when working with other people, and things that we can achieve that we just can't achieve when we work on things by ourselves. So here's the other question. How well are employees collaborating? How is it going? This is where things get a little dicey. So most employees at all levels of the organization have at some point reported difficulty collaborating with some people or on some things. They cite collaboration problems as a leading cause of projects failing. And here's where I'd love to get another guess from all of you. Anyone want to guess what this number means? What does the 7.47 number mean to you? Some kind of rating out of 10, an NPS score, some kind of rating out of 100. Yeah, this actually comes from a 2022 study that found this is how much time in hours employees feel like they're wasting per week. They're actually wasting roughly 8 hours of work due to poor communication and collaboration. So, surprise, you all didn't know this when you were coming to this session, but we're already doing a 4-day work week. So, if you want some data to go back to your employers to share about the benefits of a 4-day work week, good news is that we're already doing it. We just didn't know it yet. So here's the thing. I'm all in for a 4-day work week, but we actually want to be able to take those days off. We actually end earlier at Life Labs Learning because of the sense of really looking at improving collaboration. So these 8 hours should be intentional time to recharge. We should be intentional and explicit about it. It shouldn't be this unintentional offset, time lost, frustration, confusion that comes when we're not effectively collaborating. So fear not, this is where Life Labs Learning can help. So I have been with Life Labs for over 7 years and had the opportunity of working with thousands of organizations, even more employees, teams, and really trying to find what are the skills of effective collaboration. Where do those high performing teams really set themselves apart from average or even lower performing teams? So what we do at Life Labs is we have an opportunity to work with thousands of employees across thousands of companies to really get some of these insights and skills. And we build these into programs that we can offer inside of organizations. So for today, we're going to dig into just a couple of them. It's about 12 after. So I'm not going to get into our full workshop. We have a full 2-hour workshop on conflict and collaboration. But what I want to do is focus on a couple of areas. So when we work with organizations, we get a lot of these insights. And so we also use our in-house research as well as empirical research to really look at, from the peer reviews, what are the collaboration tips? What are those hotspots where organizations, if they focus in these areas, it can have a tipping point in having a positive impact on other things. So in other words, these are the 5 areas that we have found collaboration tends to either falter or in certain areas where we can get the highest turnaround if we focus. So for today, what we're going to do is I'm just going to focus on these top 2. We're going to focus on conflict avoidance and we're going to focus on competing priorities. So I'm going to share some of my favorite tools in each of these areas, in these hotspots in particular. And so what I want you to do is really focus on what you can leave today with in the next 45 minutes that can have an immediate impact on the way that you think about your meetings, on the way that you collaborate with your employees, and be able to take these back to your organizations. So let's start here with conflict. This is probably one of my favorite topics. We can think about this not only in work, but also in our interpersonal lives. When we really dig into conflict, one of the biggest things that we see is that employees, teams, leaders, they want to bring Life Labs in, and this is their goal. They want to prevent conflict. Now, that sounds really peaceful. That sounds like a great goal to achieve, and it makes sense. Conflict can be incredibly stressful. It can make a lot of us uneasy. It can be distracting, and it can even be distressing for a lot of us. But from your perspective, what is the problem with this goal? I'd love to hear this in some of your words. What might be the problem with the goal of preventing conflict? Totally. I'm seeing even some similar answers. It's not realistic. There actually may be opportunities with conflict. Christopher's mentioning it can also be generative. So when we actually look into conflict, all of these answers are right. And actually, the much bigger problem that we see when we look into this is that it's not too much conflict that's the problem. It's in fact too much conflict avoidance. So what I'd love to do is reframe this goal. Instead of preventing conflict, I'd love for us to think about it in terms of how might we have productive conflict? We should embrace the conflict can exist, but how might we make it even more productive? Of course, this is much easier said than done. And even me coming and speaking with all of you, I have some tips, but let me share with you 2 simple examples of really powerful tactics and how they have a direct impact on teams' ability to address conflict. Here's one of my favorites, simply normalizing it. So in short, this simply means we want to make conflict normal. We want to make it expected, realistic, and maybe even desirable, rather than this scary or taboo idea. So when we start to normalize conflict, this alone can start to reduce some of that toxicity around it and the avoidance that we might see when it comes to conflict. So how might we do that? Here is one of my favorite tips. Some of you might already be familiar with Bruce Tuckman's team stages. There are 4. Some people like to say there is a 5th over here, which is the adjourning, when the team tends to dissolve or move away. So if we look at Bruce Tuckman's team phases, we could introduce this as a method and as a tool to normalize conflict. So in the research found that most teams will pretty predictably move from each of these phases into the other. So there is the forming phase. This is at the beginning where teams are coming together, where everyone is polite. They're just getting to know each other, so they don't want to ruffle any feathers. The storming phase comes, and this is where conflict starts to brew. This is where there may be competing priorities, differences in roles and responsibilities. That needs to happen before they can start setting into the norming part of the phase of the team creation. So when we're looking at that norming phase, this is when we can start seeing some of that collaboration. We start to see some things that are implicit become explicit, and then we can get to that performing phase. Some research suggests that most teams actually never quite get to that performing phase. Only around 30% of teams will get to the performing phase. That doesn't mean work doesn't get done in each of these phases, but it is helpful to understand this model in order to onboard the team to have a better understanding of where they are and how they might get through that storming phase in order to get to the norming and the performing. This model works for me in grad school. This is what we used, but I was also introduced to another way of normalizing this. This comes from Scott Peck's community stages. I love this because it feels like a really good parallel to the Tuckman model. So if we look at Peck's community stages, then we can start to see that sense of pseudo-community. Many of us have probably felt this in some way. This is where people are overly nice, we're careful, we just want to be liked at this point in our stages. And so we can't quite get that work done until we move into the chaos. So the chaos is when we start to explore our differences. There's potential confusion in terms of how we are operating, who is owning what, and this is where we see those disagreements arise. We have to go through the chaos to get to that emptiness phase. So when I look at the emptiness stage, what I found was really fascinating is at the beginning, it doesn't sound great, right? This is where there's like that post-conflict drain. There's uncertainty. There's exhaustion from all of the chaos that team just went through. But it is needed because what we have now is like this sense of members start to be able to share their real feelings. They start listening to other members of the community only because they already went through that chaos. So maybe they're sharing their feelings of dejection. Maybe they're sharing their feelings of fear, inadequacy. So we're starting to openly check our assumptions. Those implicit feelings that we had are becoming more explicit in this emptiness phase. And only once teams and community members have gone through that, they can address those feelings. They can really start to see that community can characterized. So this is when we see high trust. This is when we see productive conflict. This is when we see smooth collaboration in that place of community. By getting through that third phase, that third stage, this is when community can actually start to experience some of that increased risk taking, some of that psych safety that we often talk a lot about, and the team's more committed to then working together. So in both of these cases, what I want to highlight is that conflict is normal. Conflict is necessary. So we have to go through the storming. We have to go through that chaos. And this is where I could probably insert all of my jokes of a team isn't a team until they've had their first fight. If you're familiar with Esther Perel, relationship psychologist, would say the same thing about our personal relationships. A couple isn't a couple until we've really had our first conflict. And so if we kind of think about this in terms of the teams that we might be on, the communities we might be a part of, I'd love to do a quick pulse check. So there will be a poll that's going to populate. You can see that poll just below. I'd love for you to select, where do you think your company's teams on the whole, what stage do most of them fall in right now? 1 is all the way to the left in that forming or pseudo community phase. And 4 would be all the way to the right. The question is, where do you see your company's teams on the whole? What stage do you think they fall in? All right, so I think this is pretty fascinating. Looking at the poll, around 50% of us are seeing that our teams and our communities are there at stage 1. This is super normal. Even looking at the research around the Tuckman phases, anytime someone leaves a team or someone joins a team, we actually have to see those teams go back to the beginning. They can quickly get through these phases if they've worked together before, and there are some tips and some tools to get through these phases and these stages faster. But even looking at 50% of us really looking at that stage 1 or phase 1, 43% have gone through the chaos, have gone through the storming to get into the norm. All right, so normalizing conflict is important. There's language we can use. There are phases and stages we can name. I love this tool because I think it simply allows for us to have a healthy conversation around that conflict. The second tool that I will share is another one of my favorites. This is around how can we engineer conflict. So ironically, while unproductive conflict is so unpleasant, it often tends to have us kind of avoid conflict altogether and at all costs. That ends up leading to this perception that conflict isn't helpful, and we're all sort of at this mercy of this conflict monster. But what I will share is that there are healthy ways that can have an impact in terms of how we start to engineer some of this productive conflict into our teams. This is an idea of red teaming. Sometimes this is called red shirting, but I'll give you an example of this exercise, share how it works, and then I want us to get a chance to play around with this a little bit. So here's how this works. When you get a sense that the group just isn't challenging ideas enough, you could call this social loafing, or the idea of really not speaking up in meetings, not naming that elephant in the room, you can metaphorically ask someone to put on the red shirt. In some of the companies that I've worked with, It's called red shirting, red teaming. Some company I worked with once had actual hats that people would wear a hat when they were embodying a persona. This person's job is to actually step back from the conversation and purposely, critically evaluate the decisions that are coming up. So, whatever there might be, they're going to be challenging the assumptions. They're going to be bringing up possible problems with this and generally trying to poke holes in ideas that are coming up in the meeting. And since this is a role that everyone is being asked to play, everyone is aware someone is playing this role, it can start to feel a little bit safer than just kind of shooting down these ideas by themselves. So the advantage of this tactic, just to name it, is that it helps everyone be able to identify those problems. They can surface those alternative perspectives and ultimately start to spark innovation. Sometimes this is called perspective hindsight. So we can really look at this ability to see what might be the problems with something before we move forward, especially if we are all playing that role. Many of us might be familiar with the concept of confirmation bias. Confirmation bias happens when we see something, we want it to be true. So then all of the other ideas that we kind of surround ourselves with will be in support of that bias. This happens a lot when we're trying to solve problems, when we're ideating. So it can be really helpful to have at least someone's job to be the person who is poking the holes. And you can do this simply by asking someone to put on the red shirt. The team can go around in what we call a round robin. So everybody has a chance to speak. You're hearing from everyone. Everyone has potential thinking time to be able to respond and participate in the conversation. And then we can hear those critiques. At the end of the conversation, the person will metaphorically take off the shirt and you have your takeaways moving forward. As an alternative to engineering conflict in this way, we can simply look at a pros and cons list. This is not to point out and create a debate on things, but it is meant to be a collaborative opportunity for the team to assess what are the different ways that this could go well and where could this fail, where could this fall apart. Then together, the team can then explore and ways to impact that. So exactly, I'm seeing some ideas in the chat, really looking at that idea of empowering that devil's advocate. I don't know if any of you have worked on teams or worked with collaborators who maybe have a tendency to be able to spot some of these things. That could be a gift. Rather than it feeling like, oh, that person's really hard to collaborate with, have them be able to embody that gift of seeing what might go wrong and bring them into the conversation. So it's really asking for that sense of ownership, naming what it is, and bringing that into the conversation so that it's more engineered and it's that sense of productive conflict. Let's give this a brief example as we kind of can play with this a little bit. So what I'd love to do is I'm going to share an idea with all of you. I'm going to give some thinking time. And then in the chat, I would love everybody to be wearing the red shirt. I'd love for you to critique my idea, and then we'll move forward and we'll see if we can kind of build on some of those critiques. Okay, so let's try this. My proposal is everyone at your organizations, I would love for you to go back and implement a no meetings Monday company-wide. No meetings Monday company-wide. Ready? All right, so let's red team this idea in the chat. Give me your critiques, folks. I think every company should have a no meetings Monday. All right, so I'm seeing some of these come in, and there is this almost, I get a sense of calmness while reading some of these comments because it's almost, we've just gotten it out there. We've been able to kind of say exactly what we think, what might not work about it. Our brains do have a negativity bias. It can be easier for us to find the problems with things than be able to find what is good. So now that we have voiced, we have surfaced some of the critiques of this idea, we can start to think about mitigations. So let's move into the mitigations. We can see here, Mondays are a day that a lot of people like to, they're fresh, they're right off the weekend. That's a good brain productive time. It looks like other things with we already have a no meetings Friday, so that's going to be challenging that we only have 3 days where we could have meetings. Some people use their their Mondays to kick off what they're going to work on the rest of the day. So now it gets us to the place where we might be able to tweak my idea. Any suggestions on some optimizations to my idea that have come up from the chat that we see? What might be some tweaks or some additions to my plan that could make it even better? Okay, so we see a couple of tweaks that have come in that can make this idea even better. Perhaps it's just a team by team decision, not the entire company has to have no meetings Monday, but some teams could just pick a day of the week that works for them. We could see if we do want it to be company wide, maybe it is a different day of the week. So maybe it isn't Mondays, or maybe it is just simply looking at, we don't want any reoccurring meetings. So we're going to leave Mondays for those necessary meetings, maybe with clients or the things that deal with urgency. So as we can see, there are a number of tweaks, mitigations that we can make by simply voicing. If everybody wears the red teaming shirt, then we can really get a sense of what are the challenges with this. So we've talked about two different ways of really looking at conflict. We can engineer it, really looking at how can we introduce productive conflict. And we've also talked about just normalizing that it should exist and where might we introduce it into the team to begin with. Nice work. I can't wait to take some of these tips back to Life Labs after this session. So if we now move forward into the idea of competing priorities, remember these are collaboration hotspots. Collaboration can be an exceptional thing for organizations. We really see the synergy effect. And the second hotspot here is around competing priorities. I don't know about you, but especially when we work across different departments, things are moving fast. This is where we tend to see a lot of extra friction. So we're really going to talk about a couple of different skills that can help us by aligning on some of these priorities. Let's start with the goal that often comes to us when working with clients around priorities. People will say, my goal is I want to just get all of my work done. I have an identity where I see myself as a productive human. I need to get all of my work done. This seems like a really nice goal in theory and on the surface, but what problems can you imagine this can create? What problems do you see with the goal of I need to get all of my work done? Mm. Totally. So I'm seeing some comments, even just like, what is our definition of done? Work is never done. We can get into a lovely theoretical and philosophical conversation on what done even means. Ken even bringing up the astute point that 80% of our work, it depends on collaboration. And Ashley's pointing out that what happens if we need to shift priorities? So while this goal seems lovely on the surface, just to name a few of the things that we see here, is that we start to create this conflict over resources. People become a little bit less willing to shift priorities, so that resistance tends to go up when we need to change priorities going forward. And sometimes it creates a disinterest in wanting to just simply pause to see if there's a better solution to a problem, or do we actually even need to solve this problem going forward? One of my favorite sayings that our CEO introduced me to is this a wine or a banana problem? And it took me a while to think about it, but in terms of something being a wine or a banana problem, I love that now, because if we think about it, if we actually don't address this problem, if we don't feel like we need to tackle this right now, is this something that will get better if left alone, like wine? Or is this something that will get bruised and we probably should be addressing, like a banana? Okay, so if we look at this goal and we want to reframe what this might be, instead, maybe it's achieve our shared goals. Often with working with organizations at the managerial level, there is a focus on their own team, on their own team's goal. And so where we can really look at achieving better collaboration is looking at the one team aspect. What are the goals across the organization? What are the things that we all need to achieve in order to get to our shared purpose? So when people have this business value perspective, it can truly change the way that we address conflict and the way that we collaborate. I'll give you a couple of examples. So the first is this idea of setting the frame. How might we help employees really think about the work they do in terms of shared, interdependent goals? This frame, in and of itself, can be an incredible way to really look at how we address problems. So tactic number one is really looking at setting that frame so that all people on the team, part of the organization, have a sense of being able to look at those problems from different perspectives. So here's one of my favorite ways of visualizing this. Often when we have clashes, we see things as a me versus you issue or challenge. And this simple reframe is to look at it instead as an us versus the problem. So when we start to model this way of looking at priority challenges or even competing priorities, then we see this idea of resource constraints starts to activate people's collaboration muscles. I love to physically think about this as, rather than two people sitting across a table and competing on things, have them sit on the same side of the table and address a challenge. There's a classic story in the world of negotiation where there are two companies that are competing over a finite number of oranges. So there are only 100 oranges that are left in the factory, and two different companies need all 100 oranges. So if they compete on this, us versus each other, then they might think we need all of these oranges in order to achieve our goal. Instead, if both people come to the same side of the table and simply get at the interests behind that position, they may find that one company wanted the oranges for perfume and the other company wanted those oranges for orange juice. And in fact, had they collaborated and really looked at both of their interests, looked at that problem together, they could have been on better track. So I say this because if we think about it in terms of better collaboration, better setting the frame, we can really start to uncover and unpack some of these positions. This helps us get into a better problem-solving mode. The second tool that I'll share when it comes to looking at conflict and priorities is what we like to call the BPS, the Business Priority Score. So what this is truly a mindset, really looking at how do we think of the kind of work that we're doing and how it will impact the business overall. So we can use this in conversation. Things by asking, how do you see the BPS of each of the priorities that you have on your plate right now? 1 meaning we actually don't need to do this. It's not going to impact the business very much. 5 meaning this needs to get done. So if you're not sure, or if you see it differently, involve others to really look at how we solve that problem or how they might address the BPS. I'll share at Life Labs, this is something that we use in all of our strategy planning. Every single project, every single initiative that we take on each quarter, we give it a BPS score. This allows everybody else a chance to check that. Maybe I give myself something that's a BPS of a 4. I really think this needs to get done this quarter. When presenting my priorities to other teams, they can check that for me and see if there's alignment and agreement. And if we have a ton of 4s and 5s, that gives us a really good sense of where are we going to prioritize the work that we have. Ideally, we want a very small number of 5s going into planning and collaborating around priorities. So if we take this into consideration and looking at the work that you have, I love this because it is going into Q4, addressing the priorities that you have, and just for your own eyes, you don't need to share this. The work that you currently have on your plate, what is closer to a BPS 5? This must get done. And how about the priorities that you have that might be closer to a 1? And I think this speaks to, Natalie, I'm seeing your question come through, and I think it was from a few minutes ago, but really looking at the priority as the individual's work or the company's strategic priorities. I think when the BPS as a tool, as a language, as a vocabulary can really help move the thinking of individual priorities to map onto the company's strategic priorities. Does that answer your question? Feel free to kind of chat back if there's more to say there. But I think the BPS is a great way to look at aligning individual priorities to the overall impact on the company. All right, so thinking through this, as you analyze the work that you have on your plate, thinking of those things that are potential higher in terms of the BPS score, they're going to make an impact on the organization overall. They're going to have an impact on the work that we're doing. Or where are there things that might need to shift off of our plate? It's okay if they don't get done. And actually, we probably should reprioritize our time if they're lower in terms of having an overall impact on the organization. I'll share that when working with lots of clients around strategy planning, around management, having the ability to have language around priorities is one of the biggest pain points that we see with organizations. So whether you use BPS, whether you have your own language, I think this is where I've seen a big difference in terms of companies being able to align on prioritization and reducing some of that friction that comes with conflict. Yes. Okay. So to clarify, really looking at the individualistic mindset. And I will name that this is another pain point we can see is we operate in a world where sometimes we have our own goals. It's natural for us as humans to want to get our work done, to feel productive. And so if we think about our own goals, it can be helpful to map that onto the team's goals and the team to map that on to the company's goals. And the more that we can really think about the company's goals, the company's objectives, even the mission or the vision for the organization, it can be helpful to think of that one team, that one vision mindset that can allow for some of that flexibility as priorities may need to be adjusted. Okay, so for today, we have covered 2 of these 5 topics. In our full 2-hour workshop, we really dig into all 5 of these hotspots. But I'd like for you to take a moment to decide which of these tools do you plan to put into action next. Out of looking at conflict avoidance or competing priorities, in the chat, I would love for you to kind of give me a sense of what you're taking away from today. Focusing more on conflict or competing priorities. Great. I'm seeing a lot of BPS. I'm seeing some of the red shirting. Depending on what platforms you all use in your meetings, another fun one that I've seen a company use recently are all of the fun filters. So again, depending on your style, on the culture of your team, I've seen some virtual teams use some of the filters to add a little bit of playfulness into the red shirting. So maybe it is like on Zoom, there might be the sunglasses. Whoever has the sunglasses on is intentionally playing the role of red shirting. Other aspects are maybe changing the background of the person chiming in. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of have a little bit of playfulness in terms of how people interact with each other. And Claire, I'm loving the comment of not sure that you agree that the company's goals have to come first. I love this, especially thinking about it from the managerial lens. So one of the things that we've covered today is really looking at the collaboration hotspots. But what we do is also work with managers. So aside from skillful collaboration, in our manager core workshop, we're looking at our coaching skills, feedback skills, prioritization, and one-on-ones. This is something that we really highlight with managers in particular. As they work with employees, there are individual development goals that might be different from the business. And this is where it can be really helpful for managers to have some of those skill sets on how to help enable employees on their team to be able to make progress towards their personal goals if they're incongruent with the company's overall. Where it may be helpful to have some of the conversation, some of this language is around how to prioritize time, because it is finite and those resources can be finite as well. So Claire, I love the point, and I think it is critical for a manager to be able to distinguish how to help their employees focus on their individual development plans or individual goals in alignment with the company overall. So with this, a couple of other asks for all of you. In the chat, you will see a link for some feedback. This is where I would love to hear from you. It really does make a difference to me and to know, what are you taking away from today? What would you like to see more of? So you will see the link for the feedback into the chat. Please take the 2 minutes to fill that out. That will go to Life Labs, that will go to Charter. So we'll have a good sense of the messages that you're taking away, what you'd like to see more of in the future. And if you are interested in working with one of our program consultants to set up a conversation around how we might help with collaboration, how we might help with goal setting, please let us know. It should just take 2 minutes of your time. And I'll hand this back over to Jay. In the meantime, please reach out if you've got questions for us at events at Life Labs Learning. Jay, I will hand it back over to you.
Megan, thank you for that incredible session. I think the BPS is going to be my big takeaway. There are many, but that'll be the one that we might try to deploy at Charter. So thank you for that. And as Megan just suggested, if you can all take a moment to go ahead and fill out the feedback. As we say, we want to keep iterating on and improving this program for you. So any ideas, thoughts, reactions, criticisms that you have, we're not conflict avoided here. So please weigh in. Next session will be on November 5th. If you can mark your calendars for that, we'll be doing a session on learning culture on November 5th. We will certainly notify you of that, but if you want to mark your calendar today, we would love to see you then. And in the meantime, hope you have a terrific rest of your Wednesday today, and we'll see you soon.